SIG 23, 12 January 2021. This is number 3. I should be caught up. A note on economic warfare. Yesterday, this is from Ford Observer. I would highly encourage everyone to get their newsletter. It's good information. A note on economic warfare. Yesterday, I briefly covered a bevy of corporations that ended donations to Republicans involved in opposing the Electoral College results. I want to reiterate that these policies are most likely being adopted to stay in the political mainstream and avoid negative attention. A number of left-wing political and social groups are putting pressure on corporations that have made donations to Senators Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, among others, in attempts to stop further contributions. For many of these corporations, the decision to end funding is likely a commercial one in order to avoid negative attention. But the effects will be political, and this is exactly what the type of economic warfare where the left excels. Economic warfare is a major marker of low-intensity conflict. Specifically, we're talking about economic dislocation, which is the strategy of separating a target from sources of funding or income. We saw this over the past 4 years, as likely hundreds of Americans were fired due to off-the-job activities or socio-political beliefs. You can bet most of those were conservatives. We've also seen C-suites get involved using corporate advertising budgets and labor policies to push social issues. In 2018, for instance, Levi Strauss, they showed their true colors. Levi Strauss CEO Chip Burr allowed paid time off for employees attending anti-gun protests. Did you know Levi Strauss was an anti-gun company? Why buy anything from them again? This is just one of numerous examples I've covered in this report. This activity is euphemistically referred to as corporate social responsibility, which is the corporation's vehicle for political and social effects. Given the recent decisions on political contributions, this could be expanding, further blurring the lines of commercial, social, and political interests. The cumulative view of what's happening is clear. Military theorist John Lewis Gaddis defined grand strategy as activity designed to separate an adversary from as many pillars of support and influence as possible, while increasing one's own support and influence as much as possible. This appears to be the grand strategy of the ongoing, euphemistically, I'm going to add, cultural revolution. From the Senate, news from the Armed Services Committee. They're going to hold a hearing today on civilian control of the armed forces. Observers note there has been growing concern regarding President-elect Joe Biden's nomination of retired Army General Lloyd Austin for Secretary of Defense and the preservation of the tradition of civilian control of the military. Austin will become the third defense secretary nominee to require a waiver from Congress to serve due to his military service within the last 10 years, as stipulated by the National Security Act of 1947. The approval of retired Marine Corps General James Mattis was the second to receive a waiver in 2016 to serve in the Trump administration. Some Americans are concerned that waivers will become the rule instead of the exception, and that the military could be used by a president with less accountability domestically. So, low-intensity conflict in sum. POTUS declares state of emergency ahead of possible threats and violence. President Trump approved a declaration of a state of emergency in Washington, D.C. and ordered federal agencies to assist in the security of the 59th presidential inauguration through January 24. The Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Homeland Securism, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency are authorized to provide appropriate assistance for required emergency services. Observers note. The FBI recently sent out a bulletin to law enforcement agencies warning of armed political protests in D.C. and at state capitals across the country in the lead-up to the inauguration of 20 January. Max reported on this last week and noted that one flyer for the state protests had no affiliated organizations. Typically, an organization will brand a flyer in order to increase notoriety. So far, this hasn't been the case for these protests, which is odd. The two most likely explanations are that armed fringe elements want to drive unrest with some anonymity, or that the attempts to organize armed protests are a fabrication for political effect. More recently, another channel of online propaganda indicates that a million militia march is planned for Washington, D.C. on Inauguration Day. March organizer Vic Freeman, in quotations, writes that millions of militia members will converge on the Capitol to prevent President-elect Biden from being sworn in and entering office. It's unclear what actual affiliation Vic Freeman has to the militia community. A webpage for the organization is hosted at a commercial speaker company website with pages asking for support from anti-fascist and Black Lives Matter activists. This could be a parody or just a poorly produced call to action. Either way, there are two separate channels of propaganda indicating unrest around 20 January. The militia march is unlikely to materialize in the size or numbers being claimed. It may not even happen at all. I've noticed numerous prominent Trump supporters disavow future protests, especially at the inauguration, which could lead to much lower turnout for any event, regardless of location. Protest activity is still likely, however, and there may be elements on the right and left who attempt to cause disruption or violence. Leftists launch militia wing for uprising defense. In response to the riot at the Capitol last week, the Revolutionary Abolitionist Movement, or Al-Qaeda in the United States, they are the base, announced the formation of an overt militant wing in order to defend people from the state and fascists. According to RAM, the Revolutionary Abolitionist Front, or RAF, will provide security at disruptions, help build wider uprisings, conduct training, establish safe houses for leftists, and halt evictions. In addition, the group will conduct militant patrols of communities and surveil law enforcement, an activity referred to as Cop Watch. Observers note, inspired by the Rojava revolution in northern Syria, RAM, or RAM, is an anarchist organization of decentralized affinity groups in approximately 5 states. Since their founding in 2017, they have largely been involved in typical anti-fascist disruptions, propaganda production, and calls for the abolition of prisons and the state. The creation of overt militant guards and patrols is a significant development for this group and the far-left proto-insurgency. RAM activists claim that the RAF will be modeled after the armed patrols of the Black Panthers from the 1960s and 70s, but most of their known chapters are in cities with very strict gun control measures and anti-gun communities. The presence of armed leftist groups that increased throughout 2020 will likely continue to grow this year. Of note, the Black Panthers' armed patrols attracted significant attention of law enforcement, and the RAF will likely attract much the same. Leftists call for inciting violence between Trump supporters and the government. Far left-room participants called for inciting violence at future political events in order to cause settler-on-settler violence between Trump supporters and the state. They predicted a broad authoritarian response from the government that will continue to vilify anti-fascists as well as provoke a response from conservatives. Observers note, accelerationist rhetoric is most often observed from the far right, but the ultimate objective for many far-left anarchist groups is the elimination of the state as well. Far-left abolitionist groups may attempt to instigate conflict between enraged Trump supporters and the government they perceive as illegitimate. The desired outcome is a potential overreaction by the government, a subsequent civil war, and an opportunity to exploit these conditions by establishing their own autonomous states and insurgent forces. White nationalist groups boost online recruitment efforts. White nationalist chat room participants expanded online recruiting efforts, targeting conservatives and Trump supporters who were either leaving or being banned from mainstream social media platforms. Observers note, logic would dictate that if you ban people from an area, they're going to go someplace else. So maybe that's the plan from all these liberals. Maybe that's exactly the plan. In order to have since they don't want a reasonable dialogue, but in order in order to have a reasonable people, you should have something that inspires cooperation, but not the kind of garbage that we've seen in the last 4 years. Far left abolitionist groups may attempt to instigate conflict between enraged Trump supporters and the government they perceive as abolition. Oh, I read all that. Okay. I'll move on. So, one of the main goals of the white nationalist movement is to recruit significant numbers of conservatives and civic nationalists. Some are convinced that recent events surrounding Parler will radicalize disillusioned white conservatives who may become more open to joining white nationalist groups. What about all the white folks that have a lot of friends, relatives, and acquaintances who are conservative and don't necessarily want to demonize their family and friends? What about them? You're really whittling down the amount of people you can draw to you if you start demonizing and shunning and labeling vast segments of our population. Word to the wise. Upcoming event calendar. Today, Anti-Fascist Disruption. This is 12 January. Anti-Fascist Disruption, Eugene, Oregon. What's Oregon? So, 16 January, Anti-Fascist Disruption, Spokane, Washington. Really, the people in Oregon and Washington, the western portions, maybe they need to form their own state. Maybe they need to form that state with people in California, create a large swath, and then defend it, actively defend it. I mean, I need to, I'm going to try and find out just exactly what the state of Jefferson wants, because they've been around for a while. They've wanted to break from California for a while. So, 17 January, refuse to be silenced, armed march, Washington, D.C. and state capitals. 20 January, 46th presidential inauguration, Washington, D.C. 20 January, Brown Berets national call to action, multiple states and cities. 20 January, Million Militia March, Washington, D.C. 20 January, Inauguration Day Disruption, Seattle, Washington, Portland, Oregon, Denver, Colorado, and Washington, D.C. And 23 January, MAGA Victory Parade. What victory are you referring to? They should just stop. I would probably watch the so-called Million Militia March because that's going to wind up being a false flag. It's going to be used. If it's not created by liberals to further call attention and scrutiny on militia members who, for the vast majority, are conservatives, are actual Americans, not liberals. That could be used as either it's a staged from the beginning false flag, or it could be infiltrated and used, much like what happened at the Capitol, where you have eyewitnesses that watch people being bussed in and led in to cause havoc. So I would watch that one. As Americans, we have to do something. We simply can't keep bending over like this. We just saw our last election, so we almost have nowhere to go. I liken Americans to what's going on in the country. I liken us, the Americans, as someone with their back against the wall, and they're being pummeled from all sides. At some point, you have to actively fight back. But I don't know what it's gonna take. I have no idea. Anyway, that's it for this one. Okay, now I think I'm caught up. I don't know. I keep saying I'm caught up. I'm trying to be caught up. I suppose we'll see till I can dig something up. But I'm working nights again, so my sleep schedule's all screwed up again. Anyway, that's it for now. Anyway. Know who your people are. Know who your people are. And watch your six and your people's sixes. Now more than ever is the time to actually develop something. One of the things that people could do is go to Forward Observer and get all the back copies of Forward Observer, especially from, I don't know, May or June of last year to this point. And copy exactly what it is the liberals are doing to create their proto-insurgency. Because they are mobilizing like conservatives aren't. They are actually doing something. But yeah, everything that they're doing, we should be doing. When liberals / leftists / Marxists / Democrats, same thing, receive support from the state, they are an armed wing of the state, a fourth column, a fifth column, whatever you want to call them. And they're using that. They're using the action of these liberals in the streets to clamp down on Americans. So maybe it's time we actually take everything that they're doing and use it for us. Maybe it's time. There's about 6 million, let's say 6 million active and retired law enforcement and military total. Now, if there's supposed to be a cross-section of society, you can guess, or you can try and make an educated guess that about 60 to 70% would be conservatives, hopefully. Conservatives, while the rest would be basically just traitors. So let's say 6 million military and law enforcement retired, and I'm rounding grossly in a grossly exaggerated way. I'm rounding up. There are, including the illegals that we know of, about 325 million people in the United States, rough guesstimate. We want military and law enforcement to be on the side of the United States of America as we knew it. We want that. But at some point, we have to defend ourselves against the state. And the state has been run by leftists. Look at all the rhinos, all the progressive Republicans. Remember, progressive is just communism without bloodshed. Communism through, progressive legal actions to further and further and further tie you down. You could liken it to Gulliver's Travels. Somebody's on the ground and there's rope after rope after rope tying them down to the point they can't move. And they're much bigger. We're much bigger. Maybe it's time. Something to think about. Sig 23 out.